Awesome. Hi, everyone. We're very excited to have you all joining us today. We have a really exciting conversation that we're going to be having around utilizing the newly released tool in Packback called Deep Dives to help inspire and support student writing confidence and help with their writing growth. And we'll also talk about how this tool can help support faculty on the grading side, making writing assignments more manageable. My name is Jessica Tenuta. I'm one of Packback's co-founders, and I'm also our chief product officer. So I work very closely with our engineering and product teams, and probably have talked to some of you all here in the audience today about your feedback and around requests for how we continue to develop the platform. I'm very excited to be joined today by Dr. Jennifer Bean and Stephen Melvin. Jennifer, do you want to start with introducing yourself? And I do just want to note that Dr. Southward will hopefully be joining us soon, probably having a little bit of technical trouble. So she may join us mid-session. I'll introduce her then when she joins us. So Dr. Bean, if you want to kick us off with an introduction.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here today. And I teach as part of the dietetics program, the interim director of the dietetics program at Mizzou, and have been fortunate to use Packback and products from Packback for almost 3 years now, which I'm very pleased about. So look forward to talking more with you today.
Wonderful. And then Dr. Melvin, would you mind telling us a little bit about your teaching background and how you came to Packback?
Yeah, I'm Stephen Melvin. I'm a senior lecturer in the English department at the University of North Alabama. And I got just a call in my office one day from someone saying, "Hey, I'm from Packback. Would you like to check this out?" Honestly, I was really skeptical. AI kind of frightens me. I'm one of those kind of deliberate Luddites. But the minute I adopted it, I fell in love with it, and I've continued to use it ever since. I can't even tell you, 4 or 5 years maybe I've been using it now.
Awesome. Well, we're really happy to have you both. And I do see Dr. Southward just messaged in the chat. I have my colleague Anne joining us today. So Leigh, Anne will help you out with some instructions, probably in a private message, to help get you switched over to a panelist account. And we'll keep rolling. This is what happens on anything we do with Zoom and with tech. We roll with the punches as they come up. We're very excited to have you here, Leigh, and can't wait until you're able to speak in the panel. So when that happens, we'll be sure to introduce. And I wanted to start today with just a question to the audience, kind of an overarching preamble for the conversation we're going to be having today, which I think is probably on everybody's mind, is with all the recent changes related to ChatGPT and emergence of popularity around large language models, a lot of people have been asking questions about the role of writing assignments and the role of writing assessment, and even having some very bombastic articles going out in the press around, is the college essay dead? And I kind of want to just put that out in everybody's minds here of, we're going to be having this conversation, and we'll probably pepper the panelists throughout the conversation around the way that they view writing assignments and why writing is still and is arguably increasingly more important in the context of everything that's been happening with GPT. So yeah, very excited to jump off and give a quick introduction around how the panelists are currently using Deep Dives in their class. I will give a little overview of what Deep Dives is for those who are new to the platform just in a moment here, but I want to kick off with forgetting about the technology itself. Tell me a little bit about the assignments that you're doing on the Deep Dives platform, and what were your goals for student writing when you decided to implement this new tool in your class?
Let Stephen go first. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think I beta tested this. And again, I will be honest, I was very skeptical because I thought there's no way that any kind of program could really dig in and look at the nuance of writing and the use of grammatical conventions and things of that nature. But I was very impressed with it. I use it in my composition classes. They write their essays the same way they would normally type it up in Word and submit it. And then in my literature classes, I give them 10 prompts, and they choose 3 of them to write a short essay about some of the text that we're talking about. And I've found that the students really love it on a number of levels, but the main thing they like is it gives you real-time feedback as you were typing. So it will warn you if you've misspelled a word, or if you've made a particular grammatical issue, or it tells you how often you're in passive voice. And it also gives them kind of a guide, like a window. You're going to make somewhere from this number to this number if you submit it at this moment. And the students absolutely love that, and they're consistently telling me that's their favorite part of it.
That's awesome. And can you tell me a little bit about the kinds of assignments that you did in composition and in writing before Deep Dives, and what those assignments look like now that you've implemented this tool to host your writing assignments?
Yeah, they're absolutely the same. The only thing is I used to give paragraph counts instead of word counts because I found they would sometimes pad with a lot of unnecessary words. But that hasn't been a problem. And the only difference I have seen, and we were talking about this the other day, is my grades have just shot through the roof, to the fact where I'm afraid that some of my colleagues are going to think that I'm a really soft grader. But it is, I think, a lot of that feedback that Packback's giving them that's helping them.
So awesome to hear. How about you, Dr. Bean? Do you mind telling us a little bit about how you did writing before deep dives and then what your assignments look like today?
Absolutely. I use the deep dive part of Packback in a very different way than Stephen does. So mine are more for short form. I teach as part of a medical profession, and I have a lot of healthcare professionals that take the courses that I utilize Packback. And in that, I'm training them how to write clinic notes like they would write in an electronic health record. And so what the benefit of using Packback has been are those guiding questions, and so that they can ensure that they're using evidence that they gathered from our case patient's medical record to inform the problem, which will become their diagnosis, to inform their intervention. So their intervention has to be related, and those guiding questions target that and highlights it for the student so they can say, oh, I can go back and I have the students use it as a bit of a double check. So did I incorporate this into my problem? Did I incorporate this into my intervention? And so they do the students enjoy that. I have the same problem with Stephen. I looked back after our conversation, and the years that I didn't use Packback for this assignment, the grades were about 5% lower. And with Packback, and I'm not really evaluating any differently, it's more symmetrical, to use a better term there, that the data that they report is reflected in the problem that they identify is reflected in how they want to fix that. So as far as ease for me, it has dramatically cut down my grading time. With my courses are the one that I use Packback with can range from as small as 25 to 30 to as big as 180. And so being able to utilize the AI to assist with the writing component, and then to set up what does exemplary look like, what does acceptable look like, what are those, and setting that expectation with the students is that if I give you exemplary, you can expect that's 95% of the points for content. That's great work. If it's 90, you did exactly as I asked you to, no more, no less, but that's also good. If it's developing, then we have more feedback in there. So it is improved it from the student perspective. I'm knowing exactly a way to double check themselves. It's improved from my perspective as an instructor with my time.
That's awesome to hear. And I know that for all of our panelists that are joining today, writing has been a large component of the course before and after the use of deep dives. So it's exciting to hear that by introducing this platform, it's helped to support your grading time, where it's not necessarily introduction of new writing assignments you didn't previously have, but it's making it more manageable for you to do the assignments that you've always needed to do in this notion of building students' communication skills within a non-writing specific class in two of your cases, and then within a composition class for you, Stephen. So I'm so happy to see that that Leigh Southward joined us. Leigh, would you mind introducing yourself? I'm so sorry you got caught in the waiting room there. I'm really happy that we're able to have you join us today. And I'm so excited. I know that we got a chance to talk before this session about some of the interesting writing assignments you do in your fashion history class. So would you mind giving a little bit of context about how you currently do writing now with the use of deep dives and what writing looked like before?
Well, I'm glad to be here too. Technology, yay. But I teach a course called History of Dress, and I use the deep dive platform to have students, they have to post an image of a historical garment or a silhouette, and then they have to find where a current modern day 2020 forward fashion designer has used that influence or that inspiration from that historical silhouette into their current collection. And so students can, they have to write a description of each, the historical fashion, and then how the current modern day designer has used it. And previously their writing was not really very good, like sentence fragments, run-on sentence, misspelled words, not capitalizing proper nouns. Please don't fall over, Stephen. I can see that, you know, you're probably having pains right now. Yeah, it was, and it's things that I thought, you know, well, did students not learn this in like 6th, 7th, 8th grade English maybe? And so it's helped a lot with their writing, communication, and it's also, I think, helped them to be able to better explain the historical context, how a current fashion designer has used that or replicated that, instead of just like labeling it, because they have more confidence now in their writing, in their written communication skills. So I've seen like 1,000% improvement in their writing, but also in answering the guiding questions.
Wonderful. That's so awesome here. I think you're touching on something very important, and it's also something we heard throughout our initial research when we were determining whether or not we should build deep dives, right? A lot of what led to this product coming into existence was actually feedback that came to us about people's use of our discussion platform and wishing that there was a place that they could do longer form writing that gave the same kind of instant AI feedback. And what we heard throughout that early discovery interview process with a lot of our faculty was a theme similar to what you just mentioned, Leigh, around the range of student writing abilities that would come into their class, particularly in classes that were not focused on writing, you know, whether it's a history course or a biology course, students that are coming in and communication and writing and critical thinking skills are critical to performing well in those fields. But the actual writing ability may be very different depending on what high school a student came from, what prior classes they've taken. So something we really sought to do with the development of deep dives, which I'm going to talk about here in just a moment, was to use AI in a student-centered way, in a way that focuses on the process and gives feedback while students are writing to really level the playing field. If every student's getting feedback in real time in that moment of need before they submit, they're getting feedback in a way that they're able to immediately apply it at that moment without a penalty attached to it. And what we really have seen is the leveling out of the quality of writing that is being submitted by students, and also a leveling out of how much faculty are needing to change the score for each category compared to what the students saw. So we look at 2 key metrics when we're building out the platform: how accurate are our recommendations on each grading category compared to what the students would have seen based on what the faculty member ends up grading that student, and then how is the student growing over time in their work as well. So very, very interesting point that you brought up there, and it's something that we're hearing as a very resounding theme across the faculty that we work with, that they want their students to be supported in writing, but oftentimes they're being tasked with teaching history, biology, mathematics, et cetera, and they don't have the time or capacity to go back in and focus on kind of the foundational grammar skills. But they don't want that to become a barrier for not doing writing assignments in the course. So great point there. I'm going to give a quick overview of what Deep Dives is for folks in the audience that may not have yet used. Our platform contains several components. So when you think of Packback, our focus is on using real-time feedback, AI-based feedback to help students discover and develop their unique voice. And we do that across a few different products. Our oldest product is our discussion platform, Packback Questions, which is focused on inquiry-based student discussion. The platform coaches students on how to ask their own effective open-ended questions and helps them to develop their writing and communication skills through short-form writing in the form of discussion. And Deep Dives rolled out just this past fall for beta. Stephen was a part of that beta, and then it has rolled out publicly this spring. And it takes a lot of those foundational, philosophical approaches to educational software that we had in Packback Questions and applies them to long-form writing. So a deep focus on mastery-based feedback, giving students as many chances as they need to succeed with real-time feedback, and a focus on providing students upfront feedback before they submit so that they know what their final score will be, having that be very aligned to and transparent between the student and the faculty on how they're going to be graded. So we've been really excited to see the reaction to Deep Dive so far. It has a few key components in it. Obviously, the immediate writing feedback around students' grammar is a huge part, but in addition to a focus on grammar and spelling, the system gives students feedback on their flow, on how repetitive their text is. So if they're repeating ideas and concepts, they get feedback on that to help them be more concise and more direct. They actually get feedback on their research quality as well, which I'll touch on in a little bit more depth here in just a moment. But as they cite sources, they're not only having their source get added to their references list, they're also seeing a recommendation of how credible that source was with an explanation as to why. So they can start building pattern recognition, not only within Packback, but when they're searching out on the web or on journals to understand how to recognize a good source and evaluate a good source. We do give feedback on the formatting of their text. We generate their citations in a selected style guide format as well for MLA, APA, or Chicago style. And as I said, on the student side, they're getting feedback on the quality of their sources and help with generating their citations, which is our digital research assistant. So the student side is really focused on that upfront feedback to help them submit their best possible work before they actually submit it for grading. On the faculty side, we're using all the exact same algorithms to help make recommendations for the score for each of the core categories of the rubric around mechanical components. So everything that you see on the left-hand side here, faculty can see the same thing in the grading experience with recommended scores, which can really help to accelerate the grading process. Everything is absolutely able to be overwritten by the instructor. It ultimately is just a scaffolded tool. It's a starting point that you can diverge from as you see fit. But it does help to apply an immediate score. You can almost think about it as your first pass proofreader for the conventions and the mechanics of the work, so that the focus of educator time can really be on giving feedback on the content and ideas that a student uses in their work. So I just want to show what this looks like for a student. When they're writing, they have their draft on the left-hand side, and they're seeing in the right-hand sidebar real-time feedback mapped to each category of the rubric. And they see this change in real time as they make changes to their text. So 2 examples there, flow and organization. If they might have a really strong performance in one category and an aspect of their work that's not as strong, and they'll see that elevated up as the most important thing to work on next, and how the system prioritizes the feedback as well. This just shows what the experience is like for a student when they cite a source. So if they drop in a DOI for a journal article, or if they drop in a web source, what they'll see is a summary of how credible that source is likely to be. We took a very intended to be very unbiased approach to this. So when we look at a news source, for example, all news sources are rated as a potentially credible source, and we instead give feedback on how they can evaluate the credibility of that source. So we really tried to focus this on encouraging students to use academic journal articles, academic sources, and then give concrete data points for the student to be able to use to help them make conclusions about how to evaluate the credibility of that source based on the author, based on the how widespread that source has been used or cited. And it creates a really helpful picture of immediate feedback for the students on digital literacy and on research literacy. And then for the instructor, I'll leave this screenshot up here for just a moment. When you're grading the paper, you'll see the student's paper on the left-hand side and their references. And on the right-hand side, you have a grading interface where you see a recommended score populated for each of these core categories with an explanation as to why. So if you were to click see why, you're able to see an actual breakdown of each of the algorithms that went into the calculation for that category. So our goal is to make AI as little of a black box as possible and as transparent and explainable as possible for both the faculty and the student using it. Our belief is if AI is ever being used to influence a student's grade, it should be 100% explainable as to how that happened. So just wanted to give that quick overview for folks that are not familiar with the platform, and then dive back into a little bit more about how you all used the assignments this term. So I know we talked a little bit about the current assignments that have happened in the class so far, but if you could talk a little bit about the goals that you had for each of those assignments. What were you hoping the students would take away? Folks that are joining the panel today are interested in learning how this platform can be used to help support student writing confidence. So were there any ways that you aim to measure writing confidence from beginning to end? And did you receive any feedback back from your students to that effect? Did they bring any feedback back to you about how they felt about writing from the beginning to the end of the term? Stephen, why don't you start us off, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, I do. And particularly my composition classes, one of the first writing assignments we do is just a small in-class writing about how confident students feel about their writing. And, this is written on paper. They do it by hand. And, I tell them, be honest, nobody's going to see it. And most of them are not confident at all. And then it's actually a good idea. I haven't thought of it, but I probably could do a follow-up on the last day of class. But I have mandatory conferences twice a semester with all my writing students. So they come to me we talk for 15 minutes one-on-one, and I do ask them this. And yeah, particularly since I've implemented deep dives, the students do feel much more confident and feel much more comfortable in what they're doing with writing. So
I know since we had the opportunity to meet last week before the session, I know I shared with you transparently with your background as a literature and composition instructor. It's sort of the standard that I'm hoping that we can hold deep dives to, of making sure that we would give feedback similar to how you would give feedback. And I think it's a really high bar to hold the platform to, since that's your area of specialty. I would love to, I know this is not the question up on the board here at the moment, but I'd love to have you share the good, the bad, and the ugly of what you've experienced this term transparently with everybody who's joining us today, because I want people to know, what does deep dives do well? What does it not do well currently? Why might it be a good or not good fit for their class? Particularly with your unique background, I think people would really appreciate that.
yeah, no, I will say this, I do find myself lowering the grades that the AI gives. And that's not just because I'm pedantic, but it's just, I hold my class to a little bit higher standard because they have to learn how to write.
Yeah.
So if it's not a writing based class, I would say those are pretty accurate readings that you're getting there. The one thing I do talk to them about is, sometimes when they see that passive voice there, they freak out and go, oh, passive voice is a terrible thing. And I try to explain to them there's a time and a place where it is appropriate. So that's just guidance, and to be fair, the Packback doesn't really dock points if you've got a little passive voice here or there, right? It's when, I love this. It tells you a percentage. If you're like 57% of your sentences are passive voice, then yes, you've got a problem. So yeah, I think that's very helpful as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting to hear and helpful, I think, for the audience to know that as you're going through and grading, you're adjusting to be a little bit more stringent. And I think it's a good example of, you can kind of know how the system is grading generally and be able to have a sense of, do I want to go a little stricter than the general application? Do I want to go a little bit less strict depending on the goals for the class? And that it's able to support that for your class is really exciting. I might pepper you with questions throughout on details too. So I appreciate you sharing that. Sure. How about you, Dr. Beam? Could you tell us a little bit about your kind of student-centered goals for writing? Why is it important for your students to learn how to write and to do these assignments? And did you find any improvements to the goals that you'd have around that this term?
Absolutely. So I mentioned briefly before the class that I scaffold something that would look like a clinic note or something that someone would write in my upper level class, which is more for students that are on their way out with their undergraduate degree or are moving on to grad school. A lot of these students have not had a lot of experience writing science. And what does that look like? And science writing is very different than other kinds of writing. You get a lot more direction depending on what journal you're going to be communicating, or if this is for the lay public. And so one of the ways that I use deep dives in that particular course this semester is I scaffold for them. So their first writing assignment is an outline. And it's not something, an outline isn't necessarily something that deep dives has in its wheelhouse, like this is exactly what I'm going to do, but it is something you can use to provide them that just-in-time feedback if you write your rubric, if you design your rubric or you design your guiding questions to do so. And that's something that the students that I found that initially they struggled with a lot because they don't typically write from an outline, they don't plan their writing. But in science writing, particularly if you're going to be writing a journal article, you have all of the information you're going to have. And so then it's a matter of what story are you telling with this and how do you tell it? And I've used deep dives to scaffold with the outline, but also then to break that up. So they had to write their background and their methods section first. And so there was more targeted, I could be more targeted with zooming in and focusing in, and the AI helped with that as well as far as what's writing there. And then the next section was all about like their outcome study or their discussion part. And so they did those two big amounts of writing and then put them together, wrote their introduction and their conclusion separately. And so it gave them that option before they even submitted their final draft. Now, since this is the first time I moved this from a not Packback platform to Packback, this is the first year I've been able to do it. So I don't have a lot of those insights into what the students thought, but I have gotten to hear from some of my students that describe themselves as less confident, that this gave them just-in-time feedback from the AI, which boosted their confidence. And then they got 3 rounds of feedback from me that just was all about improving their content, and making sure that they were on track. So that's what I've seen. So to specifically address the second question there, in my upper level science class, they have 4 Packback writing assignments. I do have them do a peer assessment, which I know is not something that Packback does or that Deep Dives does now. And I know maybe in the future it could accommodate, but that's for the future. And I'd love to beta test that. Throw my hat in the ring right now for that. But they do 4 different assignments in this semester. And I utilize the other parts of the Packback platform in other ways. So essentially they are interacting with this platform every week, but not necessarily every single week with Deep Dives.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, I know we plan to talk about it a little bit later in the session, but it might be helpful for folks to hear about it now, actually. You've referenced your use of both the deep dive side of the platform and the discussion side of the platform called Packback Questions. Both, I know everybody here actually uses all the pieces. So maybe we'll kind of transition into that. I'd love to hear, Leigh, if you would share a little bit about your goals for writing in the class, and then also how you're thinking about how the long form writing and deep dives dovetails to what you're doing in discussion with the students.
Well, I don't use the discussion questions and the deep dives in the same class. But in the class where I have the discussion questions, students have just overwhelmingly said that it helped them study for the test. Formulating a discussion question and then providing an answer from credible sources. That's just really helped their grades. But with the history of dress class, I used the Packback questions, discussion questions for introductory textiles. And then I used the deep dives for the history of dress, mirror silhouette assignments. And not only has it helped their writing and their ability to communicate what they're trying to say with these mirror silhouette assignments, but also that helps them study for tests because they have to know the historical silhouettes and interpret how they've been used. So when it comes to the exams where they do have to identify certain silhouettes, then they say that that's helped them. This is the first semester that I've used this deep dive platform in history of dress, but so far it's been very positive.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Maybe Stephen, would you mind telling us a little bit about your use of the 2 sides of the platform? I've seen some faculty describe it as kind of the short form discussion helps them to build the initial confidence, and then you take it to a deeper level with the long form writing assignments. Has that reflected your experience, or I think you use them in kind of a unique way when you think about your discussion posts, right?
Yeah, I do. So the discussion posts are just made mostly to start the discussion going so that we can come into class. All my classes are discussion based. So they get the discussion going, and I will pull some of the responses they make and throw them out into class. But one thing that they have to do, particularly in composition 2, where they write their research paper, is that I require them to anticipate counter arguments and to refute them. And they're not really good at that. That's not a skill they have coming in. So even on their discussion questions, you have the option to make a counterpoint or a supporting point. So one of their responses each time we do this is required to be either a counterpoint or a supporting point. Oh. And the main thing I'm trying to teach them there is to be able to argue academically without slipping into the more nasty side of things that we sometimes do. And then something I've just discovered recently is the polls that you have. The homework poll in particular, which is where you just, the students just have to click one. I've gotten to where now I have a homework poll up when I walk in, and all the students have to get on their phone or their laptops and vote. And that is a godsend because I don't have to take attendance. As soon as I get back, I can just look and see who voted, and then I will know who is absent that day. But also it's a good way to start the conversation just by getting them to think.
Yeah, I love hearing in both of those ways. You're taking the discussion as a student-centered starting point for your lecture. So taking something that they find interesting or taking how the class feels about a topic and using that to make whatever you're going to teach about in the class really relevant to the students, right? It's really exciting to hear that you're integrating it so tightly into your day-to-day lecture. How about you, Dr. Bean? How's your experience been with the 2 sides of the platform?
Oh, I've been biting my tongue, waiting my turn. So if I can first talk about how I use all parts of this platform in my class that's geared more towards health professionals and how they interact with nutrition is all throughout the lifespan from womb to tomb. And so essentially, I set up weekly prompts. It's part of the schedule for the discussion questions. And before and at the end, so at the beginning, at the end of each theme, so let's just say the reproduction stage of life. So I have a question that talks about the introductory one, because food security is so important with all those. So it's introducing, it's getting them to think about how food security matters in the reproductive stages of the life. And then the one at the end is really the catch-all for what lingering questions do you still have? Because like that's like the opening brand, right, of Packback is what makes you curious. So what are you still curious about at the end of that module? Now, the discussion post between how I use Packback questions is that's when the students use each other to ask questions about their case study. So as mentioned before, we would read through the case. It's part of our online management, our online learning system. So the students read through, and then based on what they read, that's their question for that week. So how am I going to help our case study? I mean, that's the overall prompt is how are you going to help your case? And then the students have to talk to each other. And they may say, well, this is how I'm going to help. This is what the problem is, and this is how I'm going to help. I'm stealing Stephen's idea. I told him that last week, that I'm going to ask them to post one that is in support and one that is a counterpoint, simply to grow the diversity of thought in the question. But they're then able to refine their deep dive. So they get peer-to-peer feedback, they get AI feedback before they ever submit. And that's something that I think that's a contributor as well. In that particular class, how I use the polling is the class meets twice a week for an hour and 15 minutes. And a lot of students don't have that mental endurance to be fully engaged for 75 minutes. So I set a timer on my phone and I do a more traditional kind of lecture style for 50 minutes. And then I do a poll right in the middle. And it's essentially taking I build it in the morning, right before I go in, how far do I think I'm going to get in lecture content? And then I ask them a specific question about what we just covered so that I can get an idea of where they still need help or where I may need to focus on a little more when we come back to the material. And one thing I know I've suggested too that I think would be great, and like you said, be open and honest, is a way. So there's an option within the polling called match and message for the audience members, where you can filter that. And what would be amazing is if I can filter that to get in and say, who's telling me they don't quite get it, so that I can have an individual conversation with them, or I can say, hey, office hours is here and here, and I'd like to talk through this with you. I'd like to make sure I can clarify anything. So in that one class, everything is all involved. And then I'll be quiet because there's other stuff to talk about.
No, I love that. And just for folks that are joining us, match and message is a feature, as Jennifer was describing, where you can search for students by different criteria. So who participated this week, who didn't meet their full requirements, who cited a source, et cetera. So be able to filter by different criteria, find the students who match that, and be able to send them an email. So it's a really easy way to be able to have a one-to-one touch point at a really high degree of scale. And what Jennifer is asking for is, what if we could filter by specific polls and by a specific answer, so that you could reach out to someone who said, option C, I don't really understand this topic on the specific poll. I love that suggestion. Thank you. And it's the reason I wanted to pause and kind of talk about how everybody's using the different components of the platform, is it really ultimately is one platform for supporting student voice and writing and curiosity in a class. And the discussion side becomes a really light touch, frequently used practice assignment, really more of a formative assessment for the students, where it's based more on participation and more on meeting kind of baseline criteria, where they're able to have a practice space that's a little bit lower stakes. And deep dives then can act as that deeper summative assessment, where the instructor is actually going in and applying instructor feedback on their longer form writing assignment. So our hope really is that the two sides of the platform complement each other and reinforce each other to help towards the goals around student writing that we've been talking about. So I did want to show some results from our fall study. So as I mentioned, Deep Dives has only been out in the world for about a semester and 3/4 at this point. And in the fall, we had some very brave, intrepid beta testers, with Stephen being one of them. Jennifer, I think you beta tested with us in the fall as well. Yeah. Leigh, you are new this spring, right? I just want to make sure I get everybody. Yeah, awesome. So two of our panelists here actually tested in the fall when Deep Dives was even newer and less built out than it is today. We've added a lot of new features since this time, but we had 250 faculty members and about 14,000 students using Deep Dives in the beta test this fall. And we did a pre and post survey with the faculty participants and the student participants separately. These student participants were really surveyed around their writing confidence, their grades, their experience with the feedback. And our faculty were surveyed around their experience with the quality of student writing and also their experience with grading efficacy and efficiency. So did this help to have time savings in the grading process? Students reported a statistically significant improvement to the number of A's that they were receiving compared to their historical experience in writing assignments, which is really exciting. So just to be transparent, this is all self-reported from students, but this is students reporting the average grade that they typically would have earned on a writing assignment outside of using Deep Dives, and then the grades that they actually earned on Deep Dives in that term. So wonderful to see that we're seeing more students receive A's, but that would only help if the instructors are also finding that the experience with the students' text is stronger and that the experience with grading is better. So keep this in mind as we look at the next stats here. The one that I was most excited about from this study in the fall was actually student writing confidence. This was one of our most significant results that we found of students moving from being somewhat or not so confident into very confident or extremely confident with their writing. So to see this happen in this degree of outcome from the beginning to the end of a course, I think is very exciting to see that over the course of a single term using a platform like this that gives that just-in-time feedback, students can grow their writing confidence in a way that's going to carry forward to future classes as well, even in a class when they might not be using a platform like this. On the faculty side, we had instructors report the vast majority of folks either agreeing, somewhat agreeing, or strongly agreeing that the platform helped to make writing assignments more feasible or more manageable in classes. I know that this is not the case for our panelists today, but many of the folks who did use Deep Dives in the fall actually previously did not have writing assignments in their class because it wasn't possible for them to do so from a grading perspective. Either they had too many students or they had too many other assignments, and to add another writing assignment where they're grading by hand just wouldn't have been tenable. So a good chunk of our beta testers actually introduced writing assignments for the first time, which I think is exciting to see their results reflected in here as well. And on the instructor side, the thing that we were most hoping to see in addition to making grading more feasible, and on average, I didn't include this stat in here, but you can see it in the full white paper, folks experienced about a 35% time savings on their grading from before Deep Dives to after Deep Dives. We collected the averages from both the faculty and the TAs that participated on what they typically spend grading essays before Deep Dives, and then we tracked their actuals in Deep Dives, which is really was very helpful. And then on the writing quality side from the instructor's perspective, we found this result to be really exciting as well, to see the number of faculty who move from very neutral around their students' writing to feeling very satisfied or satisfied with their students' writing. So to see that this mirrors very closely the experience that students had with their writing confidence, reflected then in faculty experiences with the writing, was something we were really hoping to see, and we're pleased to see that that came to be true from the study. So this is, again, just one semester of data. We'll repeat a similar study in this term. Now we've collected the initial data about how this term has been performing. We'll be reaching back out to students throughout the end of the term. We'll keep expanding this data set, but this was with the beta test of Deep Dives in the fall semester that brought these results. So with that in mind, I know we talked about this a little bit, but do you notice any specific changes to the students' writing in your classes so far? I know we talked a little bit about grammar and a little bit about their comfort as they've come and talked to you about their feedback with the platform, but did anything change about the types of assignment submissions that you saw in terms of how they align to your goals for the assignment?
I can go first if you'd like. Okay.
Thank you.
Particularly, I know I mentioned this before, but it really was the big gap that students had. So in my class that's geared more towards healthcare professionals, that symmetry, because that's what you really need when you have to convey information succinctly and with evidence, is that I need to show my evidence base and I need to refer to it in my diagnosis and I need to refer to my evidence base. So that symmetry of lining symmetry of writing, I didn't have to say it 150 times. The AI said it to them and then they learned and incorporated. So that was the biggest advantage from my perspective. And I can seeing your results as well. It sounds like the students also incorporated that, and then they didn't do it after their third writing assignment. They made that adjustment for themselves.
That's wonderful. How about you, Stephen? Any really concrete and unexpected changes to the submissions that you saw this term?
Yeah, a couple of things. Like I said, they've really improved, and I don't know that I have data to support this. It's just a hypothesis I have in my head. But I think that because the AI is telling them, about the grammar and showing them that they don't have to worry about it as much, and they're able to actually focus on the content, which is honestly the most important thing in any writing, at least for me. And the other thing I think that really helps them is, we haven't talked about it, are the guiding questions that you have when you create that assignment. It's something that's I did not have before, where I would just put up topics or prompts, and I would try to, steer them in the direction I was looking. But very specifically, you can put in any number of questions that you want that that the students can be thinking about as they're writing, and I think that allows them to get a little bit deeper analysis as well.
Yeah, and actually, I have this on the next slide I was going to share with folks.
Sorry.
I'll just show it here no, just to have it be concrete for people as you're talking about that. So when setting up a prompt on deep dives, as Stephen was mentioning, you can populate with guiding questions. And on the instructor side, we use AI to be able to highlight in the student's text when you're grading where they likely address those guiding questions. So we tend to stay away from making any AI-based recommendations on the content of a student's work as it relates to what the grade should be. But we do apply tools like this that help make grading faster using AI around the content. So as you click on each of these, I expanded the, for each company, what is the product question on this case study that I screenshotted from. And you can see here, there are two possible places in the student's text where they likely answered this question, and you can tab through those and see those quickly. So this ends up doing a sort of being a heat map when grading for a quick skim to see how well did the students' work align to my prompt and to my rubric. And Leigh, as you were going through with your experience on students writing this term, did you notice anything that surprised you about the submissions that you were seeing in the quality of their text or in the structure of what they submitted?
Well, in both, the quality was better. And along with what Stephen said, students appreciated having the AI grading for their writing skills, and they were able to concentrate on the content, on the historical fashions being mirrored by current fashion designers. And I saw a big improvement in the flow and the formatting, and not just, this is an Elizabethan rough, and that's it. So yeah, I think it really helped them all the way around, quality, content, and yes, because I don't have to go in and grade for sentence structure and things like that, then I can just concentrate on the content, and that probably cut my grading time in half.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And it's actually
in this class, there's usually about anywhere from 40 to 50 students. But now in the class where I have used the discussion questions and the polling option for taking attendance, the discussion question, the class where I use that in the introductory textuals class, then I have anywhere from 75 to 95 a semester. So being able to not have to take attendance helps. And then it also helps if I can just focus on their discussion question and not, be grading for some other things as far as mechanical skills.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And yeah, those are common class sizes that we typically see on Packback. Even some of our classes are as big as 250, 500 students. We have a large handful of classes in the 1,000 to 2,000 range. So it's just an interesting thing to observe classes ranging from 10 students to 2,000 on a platform, and still seeing the benefits of being able to have the upfront feedback. Both, even if time savings isn't the key goal there, being able to put that in front of the students before they submit, it's still that focus on succeed before you submit that we're finding to be really resonant regardless of class size, which is really exciting for us to see. I put these 2 screenshots in here just to help make the instructor experience a little bit more concrete for folks that have not used before. So when I showed the screenshot previously, I showed the tab for the instructor evaluation, where you see the score is populated and you can see why the score was recommended. But we have 2 other tabs. One is for AI grading assistant tools. And under this, we offer, like I said, the smart highlights for highlighting in the text where students may have addressed guiding questions. We also have a built-in originality report that addresses both plagiarism, like traditional plagiarism, like you might have checked with Turnitin, as well as AI-generated content likelihood. And again, this brings us back to that point that I made at the beginning. A lot of folks asking questions about how does writing coexist with the fact that students can now prompt a chatbot to write an essay for them? And I think my answer to that would be 2 things. One is a focus on the process, which is what we aim to do with the platform here of having students. So Jennifer, I think her example of scaffolding the students' work through the process of seeing how do they take an outline through to developing their key points through to a final piece. You can see the through line of a student's work from beginning to end, which is really helpful in the context of a world in which a student might be able to prompt a chatbot to write something for them. Much harder to do that if you're trying to follow a student's process throughout their work, but also being able to have the baseline level of understanding of whether a student might have used AI generated content in their text. We take a very conservative approach to how we tuned our model for this. So it is very, very, very low false positives. You might have heard some chatter on the internet about some of the other tools that have been released to the internet around what their false positive rates are. We took probably the opposite approach to this of being very conservative with our flagging. And then instead of just saying a student might have used AI generated text, when you would click on the view the full educator recommendations under that panel there, it gives actually next steps depending on the risk factors of how to have the conversation around how to properly cite the use of ChatGPT and what should the conversation entail if you find that a student may have used these tools. So our hope is to continue to provide additional tools that just help make the grading experience and the feedback experience just as easy and seamless as possible. Our hope is that tech kind of disappears if it's doing its job well, and it just facilitates an easier conversation between faculty and students. And I think with that, the question I'd love to have us wrap up with is really just all of our panelists talking to the folks who joined us today about your specific recommendations or suggestions for folks who might want to try to use this platform, both from the perspective of how to use it to help drive the biggest impact for students' writing confidence, and anything that you've learned for how you might be able to use this platform to make grading more efficient. So your tips and tricks and tools of the trade for people that want to use this platform, what would you recommend before they get started? Dr. Southward, do you mind starting us off?
Well, I had writing assignments in my classes previously. I just struggled with it. Takes so long to grade, and I'm not an English professor, so I didn't want to have to. I was considering limiting my writing assignments because I didn't have the time and I didn't have the expertise to teach them how to write, subject, verb, and all that. Because over the years, I found that students, what I remember learning in middle school, they don't teach it that way anymore in K through 12 programs. So I just felt like that I couldn't. I shouldn't have to, and I didn't have the time to teach writing. So, but I didn't want to start cutting out assignments, because the actual assignments, students said, I appreciate having ways to earn points other than just exam grades. I'm not a good test taker or something, so that helped with me leaving the writing assignments in there and significantly reducing my grading and helping the students to become better written communicators at the same time.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Did you find anything that you'd want to share as tips for the grading side of the experience for you? Anything that was helpful when you were setting up your assignments that made grading easier on the back?
Just marking the things, grammar, flow, having a proper source for my question, or having a proper source for the historical garment, just things like that. But just having so many tools to choose from and to use from Packback really, I mean, it just helped a lot. It made it much more efficient and manageable.
It's awesome. And what Leigh is referencing there is when setting up a deep dive, the rubric is totally customizable. So it comes with all of these categories checked on by default with default weights, and they can be turned off if you don't want the students to receive feedback around writing in word count and depth, for example, or if you don't want them to receive feedback around source quality. However, I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like you left each of those categories on. So the students were receiving kind of the default suite of features from the platform.
Right.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. Stephen, how about you? Did you find any tips that you'd want to share with the audience around making deep dives as impactful for your students' experience and for your grading ease as possible?
Yeah, I'll go in reverse order. Grading, again, I agree with Leigh. It's the grammar, the stuff that, I used to have to spend a lot of time looking for. No offense, I don't trust it. I still go through and look at everything that it's marked to make sure. But it saves me a lot of time because now I can really just focus on the content as I go and I read. As far as confidence in improving writing, there are a couple of things that I think are really, really great there. And that's one is now you have it where you can actually highlight certain parts of the writing and you can make comments specifically on that. That wasn't in the first beta test, and I'm not going to say I'm the one that I'm the reason that's there, but I did make that comment to John and he shared it. And I was so impressed. It was like that. And there it was. And I was able to do it. And that's great because if there's a certain, just a certain sentence or a certain point in the essay where you want to say, hey, you need to go and focus specifically on this, it allows you to highlight it. The other thing I really like as far as confidence is it's so nice. Even if you're like the lowest, I think is developing, right? It's kind of embarrassing because I work with language, but I could never find like a nice way to say here, you're on the bottom tier and shame on you. Not, it's the way I make it sound. So I think saying developing is just such a nice way to say, this is, going to get you a low grade, but it has potential and you can still build it into something if you put some more effort into it. Yeah, that's wonderful. I wish that we could take credit for that, but it's really in the conversations that we had in building the platform. It was folks in our community who are faculty that specialize in assessment generation that guided us towards that terminology. So honestly, the coolest things about the Packback platform are the things that have been directly passed to us in feedback from our faculty. So I'm happy that you had that experience with that terminology. Yeah, my term originally was unacceptable, and that's a little bit harsher. I love it.
Mine too. I had that term unacceptable, and yes, the Packback terminology is much, much kinder.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that that's been the experience. We really do. We strive to make sure that feedback is able to be viewed by the students as something that's helpful and supportive, and they can apply it to the next experience that they have. So I'm happy that that's been your experience. How about you, Jennifer? Do you want to round us out with recommendations for the audience on assignments and deep dives?
I do. I think that both Stephen and Leigh have done an excellent job of addressing those two questions. So pardon me if I go a little off script, but I think the most helpful thing I can offer folks that are listening and watching is you have an experience manager. You are not doing this alone, and they are so helpful. I know Laura's in the audience, so shout out to Laura. She and I met so frequently, and she made this process a lot more manageable. Just like if I was like the student and Laura was, helping me to develop this, we chunked our tasks together. We said, this is what we did. How do you feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable doing this next step by yourself, or is this the target for our next meeting? So utilizing the resources within Packback, the human resources that are all experienced. I mean, this is their area of expertise, and they want to help you succeed. That's like their whole outcome. As well, there's a great resource pool for your students to learn to be self-directed. So when they have a question about where did this come from? Why was this moderated? I can go to their student resources. I actually just link the whole thing. It's like, I'm pretty sure you can find a link here, but if not, check there. Here's packback.co's help. Please go do that. If there's still an issue, then we can handle it, but I bet you'll resolve it here. So utilize the resources within Packback. You are not alone. You are not going alone.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Jennifer. And I also have to give a shout out to, we have many of our wonderful team members in the chat today. Anne and John and Laura were a couple names that I saw. And I know for folks adopting deep dives, our experience managers do a wonderful job helping to take how does your assignment currently look? What does your rubric currently look like? And how do we translate that in a way that keeps the whole spirit of the assignment, but also makes sure that all the tools can be utilized for grading support? So definitely just want to echo that and share that our experience managers are wonderful and do really, so it's just, I'm on our engineering side, so I hope it doesn't sound like I'm patting myself on the back here. I'm really trying to pat our team that is just wonderful for the work that they do, because it helps to have that additional support. It's scary to try a new platform, and to be able to know that the assignments have been translated over well and it's going to work in a seamless way, I think is very helpful to have that team there for our faculty. So thank you all for joining today. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just wanted to watch in the chat a little. I know managed wonderfully, but one of the things is that we were able to get here at Mizzou this year was incorporation into our learning management system, which does have a cost savings for those of you that's institutions are budget conscious. It also, from the student perspective, they just log in. We have Canvas here. They just log into the learning management system and they can go wherever they need. And it really reduces that lack of clarity that the students have about how to use this. So if you're considering this, if you're, that's something that is a process, and it does decrease the costs quite a bit. And it's something that students are then familiar with.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do work, we're happy to work with your team, your department head, your institution, depending on what works for your school. We offer inclusive access where it can be built into student tuition in those cases, if your institution is interested in that, as well as department deals, or what's typically been talked about in the chat today is really our kind of direct to faculty, direct to student adoptions, which is sort of the lightest touch way to be able to use Packback. It doesn't require institutions to have gotten a contract with us or anything like that at that point. But there are a range of ways that schools can use and do use Packback right now. So if you have questions, please don't, I'm actually going to jump ahead and show my email address here. If you have any questions or would like to follow up anything we talked about today, my email address is jessica@packback.co, and I'd love to talk to you. And if you'd like just general information about the platform, or you'd like to see a more deep dive of deep dives, if you want to see a demo, you can email curious@packback.co and we'll get that, that conversation set up for you. I know we've got about 3 minutes left in our time. If our panelists would like to stay, an extra 2 or 3 minutes, I'm sure we could take 1 or 2 questions here from the audience. If anybody has any content-oriented questions that you'd like to direct to our panelists. I know the tactical stuff we can handle around price and all that stuff. Really, if you have questions about how this tool can be used, what it did well, what it didn't do well, I'd love to see those questions. So please feel free to drop them in, and I'll hang out here for a few minutes after if anybody wants to chat directly. But in the meantime, while we wait to see if anybody has any questions in the chat, I just want to thank you all so much for being here with me today. I know that this is not only today, but also the time leading up to this. I just really appreciate you both, all 3 of you being willing to share your feedback and your experience with our community today. It's been really wonderful to get to work with you all.
Well, I just wanted to say that as far as the experience managers, it's not a hard sell. I mean, Krista made it abundantly clear from the get-go that they just want to help. I don't want you to have to do any extra work to create assignments or anything like that. We're just here to help you succeed and to make life easier for you, and also help your students learn. So that made me feel really good. She said, if I can't help you, then, because at first when I met with her, it wasn't going to work out. She said, okay, this is not for you. And then when they started talking about deep dives, and she said, would you be interested in this? I think it might help you. And that solved a lot of my problems. So it's not a hard sell when you reach out to Packback and ask them questions.
I'm really happy to hear that. And I think you touched on something that was talked about a little bit in the chat there too, that while all of these products can be purchased together, can be adopted together as one kind of cohesive platform, they also are able to be adopted individually. So if deep dives is right for a class, but not the discussion, it can be adopted just with deep dives. Or if discussion is right for your class, but not the long form writing, then just the discussion portion can be adopted. So we try to make it really flexible for what fits for your class goals. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I see we have a lot of folks heading off in the chat today. So thank you all so much for being here today. It's really my pleasure to get to be a part of this conversation, and I'm excited to continue to see how Deep Dives is helping out in classes. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me or to our curious@packback.co email if you have any follow-up questions. And Jennifer, Stephen, Leigh, thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate the time. Thanks,
My
everyone.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.